Archon is the most played format in Keyforge without question. People bring their strongest, most fun, and most practiced decks to pit against their opponent's strongest, most fun, and most practiced decks. But how many times have you sat down, read through your opponent's deck list, and started the game only for 90% of that information to leave your brain by turn 3? It's happened to me before, and I'm sure many of you watching can relate. Some people don't even make much of an effort to memorize deck lists. In my playing experience, I've watched people half-heartedly glance at a deck list and say, there's no point, I'm just going to forget all this anyways. If you're playing online, you may have access to your opponent's deck list through the game due to how third-party clients are programmed. But when playing in person as defined in the official organized rules, you only get a short time at the start of the game to look over your opponent's deck list, around 2 minutes. Knowing what cards our opponent has access to is incredibly crucial information and can completely change how we approach the game. So why do we sometimes squander that information? I feel like a lot of this issue can be attributed to just not knowing what to look for in a deck. For the majority of us playing, I think it's unrealistic to expect someone to memorize a unique 36 card sequence in just 2 minutes. However, if we can instead focus on remembering only few key areas or categories in a deck, then we can make better informed decisions throughout the game and increase our overall chances of winning. Ever since I started taking this approach to deck evaluation, that 1 minute before the game has become much more meaningful to me. I've had much more success remembering and adapting to what cards my opponent has in their deck. Welcome to Keyforge Concepts, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about the method I personally use to analyze the deck lists I face in Archon. Now, in order to effectively analyze a deck list, you obviously need to have a fundamental knowledge of the cards in Keyforge. For those just starting out, don't worry about this. Card knowledge is something that will come naturally as you play more and more games of Keyforge. As you play against different decks, you'll be surprised as to how many cards you become naturally exposed to. If you really want to fast track this, you can always look up entire card sets online, if you don't mind the spoilers and don't care to organically learn about the cards. And if you're ever in the heat of the moment and don't recognize a card in your opponent's deck list, don't feel bad asking them what it does. Even longtime players forget cards, and your opponent shouldn't have a problem letting you know what that card does. The key to analyzing a deck list is in the way you approach your analysis. Looking for specific powerful cards can be overwhelming and inefficient, and gives us only a narrow view of what a deck can do. Instead, I try to group what I look for into broader categories, which multiple cards can fall under if they accomplish similar things. This means that I don't have to worry about memorizing multiple specific cards, rather I just have to memorize what my opponent's deck is capable of. This gives me a broader overall perspective of my opponent's deck list and what I can expect from our game. Without further ado, let's get into the process. The first thing I ask myself when looking at my opponent's deck list is, can my opponent punish me for having high Aember counts? As we all know, typically it takes 6 Aember to forge a key in Keyforge. Having more than 6 in our pool can be very rewarding. It makes it harder for our opponent to take us out of check, gives us access to more expensive key cheating options if they are available in our deck, and if we do manage to forge on our next turn, having Aember left over to put towards your next key definitely feels good. However, because being able to do this can quickly snowball a game out of control, there are many cards in Keyforge that purposely punish having more than 6 Aember. The big ones I always look out for in a list are Too Much to Protect and Interdimensional Graft. The presence of either of these in a deck completely changes the way you approach a game. As long as you don't see that card in their discard pile, taking an efficient turn and going up to 9 or 10 Aember in your pool becomes a huge risk because of the potential of a 3 or 4 Aember steal. You need to make mindful decisions about whether playing your turn out to maximize Aember gain or maintaining a reasonable Aember count is more important. Cards like Doorstep to Heaven and Forgemaster Og can also both be huge punishes, but at least they're not steals. There are also other cards that specifically punish you for having 7 or more Aember, such as Ronnie Wristlocks, Drumble, Gatekeeper, and Burn the Stockpile. While not as big a potential swing, these cards are usually substantial enough that they should impact the way you approach a game. Rounding out our list are a few more situational cards, such as Cutthroat Research, which punishes for having 8 or more Aember, and Crassosaurus, which punishes high Aember counts but is a Saurian rare and requires another combo piece like 6 Aember Tyrannosaurus or Exile to reach its full potential. Seeing any of these cards in a deck list changes how we approach maintaining our Aember count, and that's why it should always be the first thing you look out for. The next thing I typically look out for is any other general Aember control in a deck. Keyforge is a race, not a battle, which arguably makes Aember control one of the most important aspects of the game. Be mindful of what type of Aember control your opponent has as well. Do they have steal? Do they have a lot of Aember loss effects? If they have capture, do they have a way to get rid of captured Aember or use it to their own advantage? And if they have key cost increases, be wary that if you go above 6 Aember, you could be forced into forging a key at increased cost. Is their Aember control instant, or do they require having a card on board before being able to use its effect? And is their Aember control recurable, as in it either has a lasting effect or has an effect that can be used multiple times while on board? It's also incredibly important to take note of what houses your opponent has Aember control in. Knowing what houses they can and cannot take you off of check with is very valuable information that you can leverage to your advantage. If you know that your opponent has used all their Aember control from one house, or only has Aember control in one house, you can put yourself into check during times that can force your opponent to make suboptimal plays to stop you from forging. The next thing I like to look out for are any board clears in my opponent's deck. Especially with the oppressive and valuable board states achievable in Worlds Collide, having a board clear in a deck is very important if you ever need to reset a board getting out of hand. If you feel a board clear coming soon, then leveraging your board state and gaining value out of your creatures is usually the better play over trying to expand your board. Keep in mind any conditional board clears, such as Axiom of Grisk, Red Alert, or Unnatural Selection, since those can potentially be made less valuable for your opponent depending on how you structure your board. Another thing to look out for are any key cheating cards. The last thing you want to happen is to feel like the game is secured and won, only to be surprised by an overlooked key charge or key abduction. If you know key cheating is an option, then you can make preparations and adjustments to your play to stop it before it even happens. High Aember punish, Aember control, board clear, and key cheats. These 4 categories are the most important things to look out for and remember about an enemy deck list. If you're able to deduce and remember these things, then you're in a great position to win before even drawing your first hand. Apart from these 4 categories, there are also other things you can look for that may vary depending on your own deck. If you're playing a deck that has only one board wipe and not many creatures, you might consider looking at how many creatures your opponent has. If your opponent is playing a slow deck that needs to reap to win, odds are they will try to get board control at some point. You'll need to judge whether you should use that board clear or hold on to it for the future. If you have artifact control cards in your deck, it might be a good idea to take a look if your opponent has any important artifacts that might be central to their strategy. Artifacts carry a little more weight to them because their effects are either very strong or can be recurred and used on out-of-house turns. There are also way less artifact control cards compared to creature control cards, which makes them that much more valuable. If your deck runs important artifacts, it might be a good idea to check if your opponent has any artifact control of their own. Seeing no artifact control in a list might incentivize you to look to set a game-changing artifact down early in the match. Look out for any potential card combos your opponent might have. Do they have the Gangernaut combo? Do they have a Brig deck? Are they running a Genka deck? Or do they just have a potentially powerful Untamed combo or Saurian board? Certain card combos might be powerful enough for your opponent to base their strategy around. And finally, look out for anything your opponent has that might disrupt the way you run your deck. For example, if you run a deck with a powerful Exalt-heavy Saurian list that relies on the destroyed effects of Praefectus Ludo or Imperial Scutum to lower the risk of exalting, then you should absolutely be scouring your opponent's deck list for any cards that can bounce to hand, purge, or otherwise get around that destroyed effect and gain your exalted Aember for themselves. Cards like Nature's Call, The Harder They Come, and Hysteria can be devastating for Exalt-heavy decks. All the categories we mentioned in this video are important, and there are others that I did not speak about or mention. Unfortunately, expecting to be able to internalize all of this in a short period of time is simply not realistic. As the sole owner of your deck, it is up to you to prioritize what you think is most important to know. Depending on the strengths and weaknesses of your deck, you'll want to prioritize the information in some categories more so than others. An Aember Rush deck is going to prioritize analysis different than a slow control deck. The core 4 we talked about in this video is always a great place to start. From there, try to branch out to as many other categories you feel you're comfortable with and that you feel are relevant against your deck. Remember not to overload yourself. Trying to remember too much will end up being counterproductive. By having clear goals in mind and knowing what to look for, you'll be making the best use out of your deck evaluation time and taking one step closer to victory. Because remember, knowing is half the battle. Thank you all for watching. Hope you were able to find this helpful. Until next time, take care, look both ways before crossing the street, and I will see you next time.